My name is Lars Williams, co-founder of Empirical Spirits. We're based in Copenhagen at the moment. We are in the process of kind of breaking down our production space, and the intent and idea is to localize production as much as possible. So to that end, we have established a production place in California, the Midwest, and soon to be a new one in Brooklyn. We're also looking at a production space in Asia and also potentially one in the UK and another one in Europe. That's because we never had the concept or want for a larger and larger gigantic factory, but to somehow be a decentralized production platform where we could access local talent, local botanicals, and have some more site-specific products. And ultimately, we've found, especially during the pandemic, that putting things in container ships was less and less sustainable. Sustainable from an energy and climate perspective, but also for time and money. So the idea is to decentralize our production. What I had wanted to do with Empirical was take the hard work and innovation and very, very long weeks that we used to put into R&D in a culinary setting, the different restaurants I've worked in, and make it more democratic, because there was this exploration of flavor and creating new kind of building blocks or foundations of flavor that we could use and create these experiences through flavor, these sort of sense memories that we could share with the guests. But ultimately, we were doing it for 40 lucky people a night, and I wanted to be able to take that hard work and make it more shareable with a larger population. And alcohol was a natural first step for us, because just due to the chemical makeup of alcohol, it's an excellent preservative. It binds very well to organic compounds that we consider flavors and smells. And it makes it so you can kind of create the same sensory experience or the same flavor experience that we would have spent hours working in a restaurant kitchen for, but we can actually package it into a bottle and ship it around the world. And then in that way we can take an expression of pasilla mije chilies from Oaxaca and share that, or at least my sense memory of being in Oaxaca and that flavor profile of that particular time and place across the world. Or pine trees from Denmark, or Mufora fruit from Zimbabwe. We were able to kind of share these red lines and flavor profiles from around the world. And then I guess as we matured, we really felt that we were concentrating on those expressions through flavor, and the fact that alcohol was involved was almost incidental. And we began to focus more and more on the storytelling possibilities that flavor could kind of share and produce. I had this idea in my head when we first started Empirical of how I wanted the flavors to taste, and the equipment to get to that endpoint just didn't exist. So the very first still that we did when me and my co-founder first started, and we were in a 15 square meter kitchen in the middle of the meatpacking district, and I had this idea for a vacuum distillation. Didn't know if it was going to work, so I took a pressure cooker and welded on bits and bobs until it finally became like a little 10-liter still, and that was what we used as a kind of proof of concept for the vacuum distillation. Of course, the equipment that we're using now is a lot bigger and a lot crazier, but it's all still things that we've designed and for the most part fabricated ourselves. We have a couple of welders that we work with now that I don't have time to necessarily be there with the torch myself anymore, but for the most part the design is one that we have put together and is constantly in flux. And we actually we'll reconfigure the stills and the design of the stills for different products. So the configuration of the still that we use for plum, I suppose, is
quite different than the one that we'll use for Ayuk or for Soka or for Symphony 6. Each one we keep continually kind of play around and try and optimize the actual structure and design of the still for the flavor experience that we're going to get. So in Plum as Opposed, we run actually 7 condensers, and then we have 3 outputs where we're actually pulling liquid out or distillate out. One of them gets recirculated back into the pot, and then we have 2 different points where we're getting 2 different flavors from the distillation as we're kind of going. The stills have also been designed to be able to give us the amount of fractions that we take. So typically in distilling, there's 4 or 5 fractions. You've got the foreshots, the heads, the hearts, and the tails. And typically you're only keeping the hearts for the most part. We take that idea and we extrapolate a little bit further. So we take between 100 and 200 cuts, depending on the size of the distillation run that we're doing. And so we've engineered our stills to be able to do that under full vacuum, which allows us to do the distillation at between 15 and 20 degrees centigrade. So we're pulling almost a full vacuum of full atmosphere of vacuum on the still, which allows us to essentially boil the liquid at as low as 5 degrees, but depending on the product that we're doing, we have different temperature and pressure settings, but typically it's between the 15 and 20 degrees centigrade. So there's a lot of special kit that just didn't exist, and it took a while to get us to a point where we got a little sharper in it. At one point I actually caved and we hired in a company that does modeling of airflow and water flow, and they typically will help airflow designs for like fighter jets and NASCAR and Formula One cars and shit like that. And we got them to model out what the perfect condenser would look for us for what we were trying to do at the low pressure and low temperatures that we're doing. So that's the one part that we sort of farmed out, but the rest of it is what in America you'd call shade tree mechanics. Over my years in the kitchen, I became obsessed with fermentation and the way that collaborating, in a sense, with a microbe gave you access to the complexity of its biomechanics and the way that it can kind of create a tremendous amount of complexity and nuance in a very simple product. So you take grapes, you add this wonderful yeast to it, and then you get something that's wildly complex and nuanced as wine. So the more that you collaborate, so to speak, with this microbe, the more complexity and nuance you can have in a product. However, a lot of those organic compounds that are created in the fermentation process, which are typically the way you're looking for as flavors in that, are esters and polyphenols, which are very light, delicate organic compounds, and a lot of those are easily broken down by heat. So if we wanted to be able to preserve the full spectrum of whatever we could do in the fermentation process, I wanted to be able to do like a low temperature distillation. That also comes into play once we add a botanical. So we typically will use different botanicals than a lot of other people. So if we want to be able to capture the really fresh characteristic, or the way that the botanical is when you have it in your hand or you take a bite out of it, we needed like a low temperature distillation, because the application of heat of 85 degrees of heat just will change the chemical compound of anything that you put into it. In the same way that, I mean, if you have a wonderful orange, that's delicious. And if you apply 85 degrees of heat, you're going to turn it into a wonderful marmalade. And both of those things are lovely. But sometimes you want to have that fresh bite of orange and not have a marmalade. And so we designed equipment where we could have both or have a sliding scale of anything in between. But often we're looking for that very fresh, unheat treated flavor that we're looking for. So if we take something like a spirit that we had a few years ago where we used fresh habaneros,
if I put those fresh habaneros in a regular still and distilled it at 85 degrees centigrade, you would have had something that tasted like, I don't know, the world's worst Campbell's soup, instead of this fresh, delicate, taste of this lovely habanero. So being able to kind of capture flavors in like a unique way, or not a unique way, but in a way that gave you access to that very fresh quality, and also not be able to really showcase some of the more delicate compounds that we get through the fermentation process. That was the kind of reasoning behind the low temperature distillation. Now it's a nightmare because it's, like I said, it's all custom kit. We have vacuum pumps running on each still. We have to use a special type of pump called a peristaltic pump to continually pump out the distillate as we're doing the distillation. So there's a lot of complexities, and there's also, because we're building something that didn't exist before, it's been a learning curve. So every time that we come up with a new design or a new way of doing something, it's like incrementally better. It'd be a lot easier if someone had done this before us and we could buy something off the shelf, but that's where we are. The goal has always been to share flavor, share experiences through flavor. We want to be able to connect people from different parts of the world. Like I was saying, be able to share the flavor experiences of Oaxaca, or the amazing, incredible things that I tasted in Zimbabwe, or flavors that we have in Japan, or anywhere in the world. I think that kind of connecting people to these different flavor experiences is something that is useful, and God knows we need to be able to connect to each other a little bit more these days. But I think we just want to give people a new experience and a new way of looking things, and maybe change the way they look at flavor just a little bit.